You know, folks, sometimes on the show, we actually listen to our own advice. And when it came time for new shoes, I said to myself, you know, that Leadville show may have something there with the suggestions they make.
I am glad to know that you find this show useful, Hottie. I don't suppose you want to share with us what you were able to learn to improve your cycling experience.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much my experience, but Mrs. Hottie's. You see, she was in need of a new pair of shoes. She had been on the Gravel RX-8s. That's the shoe, you know, the gravel shoe we've recommended for the Leadville racer should they want the lightest shoe and plan to do little walking. It's basically a road shoe that has minimal tread and takes a mountain cleat.
Yeah, I'm going to guess that you and Mrs. Hottie are actually doing a little bit more walking than that.
Yeah, you'd be right there. So when the RX-8s started showing signs of wear and tear, I decided to give her more to walk on and put her in a pair of RX-6s. The RX-6 makes the walking easier by having more flex than the RX-8 or the top-of-the-line S-Fire XC9, and it has a sturdier lug pattern that will put up better with the trudging through rock and sand.
And maybe it wouldn't be a bad shoe for hiking up Columbine or for the power line. Mm-hmm. Good advice. Very good advice. I'm glad that you listened, and I'm sure Mrs. Hottie is too. To check out Shimano's full line of shoes, go to bike.shimano.com, and thanks to Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. It is season 6, episode 16 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Houghton, Hottie to most.
And I am Fatty, and we are going to be delving into the most talked about tech subject when it comes to the Leadville 100, and that is, of course, you already know I'm going to say it, tires. This is not going to be our first foray into tire talk with Click and Clack. In episode 14 of last season, we did a poll and we had several interviews on the subject, and that show is for sure still worth a listen.
Yeah, but truth be told, we kind of put the cart before the horse when talking on the subject. A look at tires really should include a breakdown of the anatomy of our tires, what makes them up, and the different performance characteristics. That's what we aim to do with this show. And to help us, we have recruited someone who has no brand loyalty or connection. Velo and Pinkbike Senior Tech Editor, Troy Templin. So get ready for some tire talk.
Yahoo!
What is a good strategy for staying ahead of the cutoff times?
What do the experts say about sleeping effectively at altitude? And what do you each do?
For Leadville, hardtail or full suspension?
Yeah, good question.
Leadville Frequently Asked Questions, LFAQs, our ongoing life-changing Q&A session.
Ongoing, yes, 100%. Life-changing, let's not go overboard.
Okay, our race-changing Q&A session then. That sounds more appropriate. And this question comes from Dana Morris, found it on the Facebook page. Dana asks, for those who are cutting weight for race day, are you counting macros? Cutting out otherwise bad dietary habits, riding yourself into a calorie deficit, or something different? Dana says, got a little fluffy after an injury, and now Dana is fighting with the last 7 to 8 pounds that Dana would like to get rid of. Well, with a nickname like Fatty, I feel like you got to take this one, Fatty. And in fact, I'm personally interested in what you have to say because I don't think you have told me how you went from Fatty to nowhere near Fatty.
Oh, I got 12 years of a blog for you to read for that, Hottie. But, I mean, honestly, this is still an ongoing battle for me. I get pretty undisciplined about my eating when I am under pressure. And actually, about a year before the Old Fat Cyclist blog began, I had a perfect storm of pressure. I had a new job in a new state. I had twin 2-year-olds and a wife with breast cancer. That all got compounded with prednisone I was taking because I had Bell's palsy. So I got pretty big. And I am, for what it's worth, back to the weight right now that I was at when I started that blog, and we can talk about why in another episode. Meantime, let me just say to Dana, I know where you're coming from because I generally have pounds I would prefer not to have when I, am lugging myself up to 12,500 feet every year, not just on my heavy years. So let me tell you a little bit about, just a story about my weight obsession. Over several years, I whittled my weight down from, I'm a 5'7" guy. I can get up to 190, close to 200 pounds. And I whittled myself down to high 140s, low 150s most years, for about a decade. Yet I was frustrated. I could not improve my time at Leadville. Then one year, I was a little busier than normal, maybe a little less worried about the scale than I had been. And I came to Leadville 10 pounds heavier than I had been in several years. And that was the year I put in my very fastest time. I have never beaten that time. 8 hours, 12 minutes, a very fast year. My weight, 10 pounds heavier. My power was good. And my intensity, my headspace was perfect. I was off the charts. So Dana, let me tell you this. Unless you are a pro battling it out with other pros where a pound here and a pound there can matter, forget about that 7 or 8 pounds. Honestly, just don't let it be a consideration. Instead, focus on your training, focus on your on-bike nutrition, and focus on your race day attitude. Being focused, committed, and smart. That's going to matter a lot more than the few bonus pounds you carry to the top of Columbine.
Good advice there. But, I get why people get a little obsessed with weight when it comes to this event. I mean, you got to get your ass up hills, I should say, plural. And that requires a good power to weight ratio. But you can go overboard here. My lightest Leadville was around 150 pounds, 150. At 6'1", I look like a praying mantis. Didn't look healthy at all. My result was just, I would say, okay. I came back a couple years later, like Fatty said there, with 13 more pounds, and I reached my goal. So, like Fatty said, weight is not everything. In fact, it can get in your way at times. Mm-hmm. I think of the choices Dana is floating, though, cutting out the bad choices is the one that seems like a great one for anyone. I mean, that should be the choice no matter what we are doing. Writing yourself into a calorie deficit will only hurt your training.
Yeah.
As sports nutritionist Denis Fay told us last season, hard training needs to be met with adequate nutrition. Otherwise, you're just throwing away all that work. And like Denis said, when you are training hard, it is likely the pounds will come off anyhow. So have faith in it. Don't sweat every calorie. Eat good stuff. Fuel your training. And most, if not all of those extra lbs will come off.
And the ones that don't, do not worry about them. You will be fine on race day. That LFAQ, Hottie, I would say makes a great segue to talk about the feet. Like Hottie said, make sure your workouts are properly fueled. Riding hard while you're in a calorie deficit isn't going to make you faster. It is just going to turn you into a bonked zombie.
And maybe what Dana needs is a little precision when it comes to that training nutrition. Knowing exactly how much you need and how much you are taking in can offer some reassurance that you are getting enough fuel, yet not overdoing it.
Now, how much you need is something between you and your coach, but getting the amount right is something that can be very easy if you turn to a product like NeverSecond. NeverSecond is available at the feed, and they have designed their energy products around simple-to-use carb counting. NeverSecond's gels and drinks are either 30 grams or 90 grams of carbohydrates.
Yeah, this is kind of genius stuff because many of us are aiming for 60 or 90 grams of carbs per hour. So arriving at that is simple. You just count the number of gels and or bottles you have done and make sure your math is adding up.
Yep, simple addition. And NeverSecond is just one of the many ways to keep up with your fueling needs. The feed has dozens of other brands that make class-leading sports nutrition. But if math is your challenge, it is a challenge for all of us at 10,000 plus feet. Well, NeverSecond might be the easiest math you're going to do all day.
Claim your $80 in annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Register your email and verify your phone number. Then spend your first feed credit of $20 right away.
In our last episode, we took a lengthy look at grips and handlebars, and it is worth mentioning one more important part of getting a grip is gloves. Like the wrong set of grips, bad gloves can ruin your ride.
The advantage of gloves over grips is that if they bother you, you can just take them off mid-ride. Hard to do with grips, right? Pulling those things off in the middle of the race, trying to slide a new pair on, but gloves come right off.
Not advisable.
And of course, we see some people rejecting their gloves right there on the Leadville course, discarded gloves all over the place.
I think we talked about that in one episode. Regular listeners to this show have heard us recommend DNA for their custom kit needs, but did you know that DNA has great gloves too? That's right. If you are a fan of the DNA lineup, then you can complete the look and the feel with a pair of great gloves.
And no surprise, DNA has more than one offering. Their lightweight Summer Elite glove comes in both long and short finger and in multiple colors and patterns. This glove seems like the perfect glove for most of your day on the Leadville course.
Yep, but in Leadville, summer can turn into a drenching rainstorm or winter, which is why you want to have a pair of DNA's winter gloves on hand or at least in a drop bag. They are wind and water resistant. They're good down to 35 degrees. They're going to take care of you if the weather turns bad. All of DNA's gloves are touchscreen compatible, so you can swipe your head unit screen at will.
So don't forget your gloves. You can find a pair or two on the DNA website. That's dnacycling.com.
Have you ever read the sidewall on your mountain bike tires? The amount of info stamped in the so-called hot patch is just insane. TPI, PSI, ETRTO, TR, EXO, BINGO, black chili. It is like a research project figuring out all that stuff. I give up.
Yeah, not to mention the marketing spin that's plastered onto those sidewalls. It's hard to know what the heck is in our tires. So for this tire episode, we decided to go back to the basics and enroll in the Tire 101 class, if you will. Let's get to know our tires on a basic level. What's in them? What do some of these symbols mean? And how can we use that knowledge to make an informed choice? Because tires, after all, are the most important tech choice you will make for the Leadville Trail 100. Our help on this topic comes from Troy Templin, who has covered bike tech for years, first at Road Bike and Mountain Bike Action magazines, and now with the Outside Group for Velo and Pinkbike as a senior tech editor. Troy not only has tire knowledge, but he knows what to look for in a tire for the Leadville 100. Okay, we want to welcome to the show again Troy Templin. Troy and I go back a little bit. We know each other. We're both here in Southern California. I met Troy back when he was with High Torque Publications, Road Bike Action, and Mountain Bike Action, where he was a managing editor. And now he's with the Outside Group, and we ran into each other again, Troy, I guess at Sea Otter. We were checking out the bikes and the people and the tires, which is what we're going to talk about here. But first of all, Troy, you're a like Fatty and I, you're a Leadville veteran. So tell us your Leadville story. How many times have you been there? What are your best times? And if you can, tell us the tires you ran.
I kind of accidentally fell into Leadville. I was not a endurance mountain biker. Did a lot of the short cross-country races, and a couple of friends invited me to Tahoe, and I did fairly well at Tahoe and entered into Leadville, and a few weeks later, I think it was like 3 weeks later, I was headed to Leadville, and I've raced it 5 times, and best finishing time is just under 9 hours at 8:40 or 8:50 something.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was one of those where, I could have pushed it on that last climb and gotten probably an 8:30, but it's always nice to be able to get to the finish line not completely devastated and drink a few beers and hang out and just have fun. So, I rolled into town, but I think the experience of Leadville is what I really love. And so I've been there, I think 7 or 8 times now, not always racing, helping friends and crewing and just enjoying the vibe of the small town.
So what was your slowest finish?
Slowest actual finish, in 2019, I did a little bet with a buddy, and he rode a gravel bike, and I rode an enduro trail bike. So like a I think it was like 160 in the front and 140 in the rear.
Oh my.
Yeah, definitely not the smartest plan, but it was a lot of fun. And I think it was like 10 hours, just like right at 10 hours. Yeah, so not a terrible finish. I wasn't fit, but I felt pretty good, and I kind of gave him the bet, hey, I bet you I could beat you on my trail bike, you on your gravel bike, kind of a deal. And I did. So that was the better part of it. He probably was faster, but with it being his first time racing Leadville, he didn't calculate in those stop times, and when you stop for your crew, you got to be quick, before you know it, 40 minutes adds up from all these little 5-minute stops here and there and those sorts of things, and getting stuck in traffic. So,
and I'll bet you enjoyed the Sugarloaf descent and the Powerline descent and the Columbine descent more than I ever have. Ever.
Yeah, that's one of my things that I try to explain to people when they head to Leadville, is that it's not a hard course, but it's actually it's wide but technical. The trails are not terribly difficult. It's really pretty open, but there's just so many small rocks and little rain ruts, and every year it's a little bit different that, when you're descending, it could be oh, this is a freeway, or it could be just hopping and jumping all over the place and really putting your tires and your bike to work, and your lower back, depending on which bike you choose.
Can you give us a sampling of the type of the enduro bike excluded? We'll set that one aside. What kind of tires did you run over the years at Leadville?
For the most part, I think my first year or two, I was riding a hardtail and, some little 1.9s or 2.0s, really looking for that weight category. And I think both of those years I got flat tires. And that, as fast as I want to be, I don't have a huge crew. It's usually just my mom comes out. She's over at Twin Lakes, and I see her twice, and then maybe she'll come to the bottom of Sugarloaf or whatever just to wave me past before I get to town. But yeah, I think I got a flat tire both years because I was chasing the grams, chasing the lightweight, and paid the price being a novice to it, and really trying to be being super fit and just trying to push through everything. And my fastest year is the year where I went a little bit heavier on the tire. I went full suspension, short travel bike, and I felt a lot faster on everything and just more confident, having that slightly larger tire, a little more air volume. Yeah, and I was surprised because that was a year where I didn't feel as fit as I had in the past. But, when you got to change a flat tire, that costs you a half hour, that costs you 20 minutes or more. And that's if you're good at it. If you're not good at changing a tire, it can feel like it takes all day.
Well, a lot of sportsmen will say I'd rather be lucky than good. And I guess I was lucky because I ran the same type of tire setup as you, Troy, in my first couple of years, like a 1.95 Renegade, Specialized Renegade S-Works on the back, and then a, what do they call it? The Fast Track on the front in like a 2.0, also an S-Works, and did not flat. I don't know how. And I think I did that 2 years. In fact, I rode that setup and did not flat either time. So I don't know how I pulled that off.
Yeah, I've ridden both of those tires there. One year I cracked a rim because I was a little low. Was losing some air, and I hit a big rock on one of those descents. And I like to say that I'm not the fastest climber, but I definitely like to make up the time going downhill, and I will take the risk. And I run a bell. I like to run a bell so that when I'm coming by people, they know I'm coming, and they go their line, and I'll take the dirty line. So I'm used to taking kind of the riskier side of things, and I think that's what I've really enjoyed just in the progression since I really started it in 2013, 14 is, rim technology and the width and the volume that you get out of the same size tire. You can run a 2.0 and it's probably 15% larger than it was. Now it's 15% larger than it was back in 2013.
So you really are the right person to be talking about tires in this show for this episode, because you've really run the gamut from very narrow tires to an enduro bike, for crying out loud. So let's start with the essentials. What are the factors a cyclist should consider when they are choosing a tire for the Leadville 100?
The one thing that is really good about modern tires is that they're all kind of pretty good. And simply looking at the weight of a tire and the kind of the lug pattern or like the tread that is on it is going to give you a really good indication of how two tires compare. Even if you don't know anything about those two tires as far as construction, puncture protection, anything like that, looking at kind of that weight category and the type of tread that's on it, if they're in the same weight category, they're going to be very comparable tires. Now, obviously, there's compounds. There's a lot of other things that are going into it. But I think that gives you a really high-level overview of like, okay, this tire might be too much, too beefy, sidewalls might be too stiff for a race where you're going to be in the saddle for that long. And at the same time, if it's coming down into like gravel tire weights, because there are some cross-country tires that, are coming in at medium gravel tire weights, so tires that are significantly smaller, less rubber, that gives you an indication that this tire needs support, right? You need to be able to rely on someone else to support you if you get a flat tire, because there won't be a way of fixing it. Like if it goes flat, it's going to be a bad day.
Troy, give us a kind of an anatomy of a tire. Like what are the parts that make up a tire?
What gets talked about a lot is like TPI. So common in mountain bikes is 60 TPI, maybe 100, 120, kind of that range TPI. And that's kind of your thread count. So that's the actual like fabric that's underneath of the rubber. And when you go to like from 60 to 120, that you get more of them, but they're smaller, so they're more compact. The advantage to that is there's less rubber going in between them to hold it all together. So you can get a little bit lighter tire, and you can usually implement some sort of puncture protection or kind of bead to bead protection that will help minimize flat tires, maybe pinch flats, that sort of thing.
So that TPI thing, that's your casing? Is that what that is?
Yeah, so that's your casing. And the upside is that most tires are all made on essentially like two machines. There's like two machines across the industry that make cycling tires. And they're all going to be kind of designed the same. It's the secret sauce is kind of the way that they mix all of these little things. So it's TPI, the type of rubber compounds, the type of bead construction, depending if it's tubeless, non-tubeless. All of these things are going to affect kind of that overall end product. And the bead is really important, making sure that you have, if you have a tubeless setup, that you're running a tubeless tire. The type of rubber that's used really helps seal and kind of hold the liquid sealant in, so that you're only sealing a puncture where, I don't know, back in 2010, 2012, those years, you could run, a lot of people ran non-tubeless tires because they were lighter, but then they relied on the sealant to kind of give it a layer through that casing that would seal it up. And I think we've kind of been able to come away from that and have better overall performance because we're not relying on the sealant for sealing the tire all the time.
Yeah, I remember it doesn't even seem that long ago, you would put the sealant in the tires and then you would see it actually leaching through the sidewall.
Yeah, it comes through the sidewall. I mean, not as much through the tread because the tread is where you have the most amount of rubber. But yeah, the sidewall and the bead kind of area. And we really relied on the sealant to kind of seal the tire itself. And that worked because you're at lower pressures than you would get on other types of tubeless systems. But now we've evolved and technology's come a really long way, and you don't need to do that any longer. There are lightweight tires that have the specific types of rubber built in so that your sealant is only used in the case of a puncture or in the case of some sort of malfunction. Let's say, your rim or your rim tape has a failure or something like that.
All right, so we have the casing, which and the thing that describes our casing is that thread per inch number that we see on the sidewalls of our tire and the marketing documents we see from tire companies. Then we have the bead itself, right? There's the bead, which helps seal the tire to the rim and lock it to the rim. And then we see this, what are these belts? We have these other layers underneath the tire. Tell us about those, Troy.
Yeah, so like most cross-country kind of race tires, the tires that you're probably going to want to choose for Leadville are going to be single ply, maybe dual ply, and really like a dual ply tire is actually 4 layers because of the way that it gets wrapped around the bead and then back up into the casing of the tire. And so a single ply tire really is two layers as it kind of wraps around the bead and comes back up into the center. And when you think of kind of the way that those are laid, then they put other layers within those. So like a Kevlar layer or some sort of rubber compound that gives it protection. So most cross-country tires are just going to have either just sidewall protection. So they'll have an extra layer just kind of on the sidewall from the bead up to the tread, or for really kind of the lighter weight race specific tires, they might just have it just under the tread. So it's really just helping if you get a puncture from riding kind of in a straight line, it'll help minimize the amount that object goes through the tire or how much of it goes through. And those layers not only slow the object down and kind of minimize the size of the hole you get, but in some ways they kind of help close it back up as well. And so that's kind of the difference you're going to get from brand to brand, is that the type of layers and the type of technology they use within those. And every brand has their own marketing name for those layers. But at the end of the day, I think there's maybe 5 or 10 in reality different types of materials that are used in there. And they're all using the same thing. They just call it something else, and how thick it is and how that sort of.
It's going to cost us grams, though, correct? Every time we start adding layers, there's
Yeah, and rotational mass is a huge talking point for racing, and the more you add to a tire, it is significantly worse for rotating mass. I mean, the further away you get from that axle, it does make a difference. And that's why you want to stay away from like trail tires or something like that. And the other thing to think about when you're thinking of tires is like a 60 TPI tire is going to give you a little more support on the sidewalls. Even if you didn't have any puncture protection or any extra layers, you're going to have more support there because of the threads. There's less threads. There's more rubber going between them. So you get more kind of this rubber support. So you get a little more, like support on the side of the tire, and it won't be quite as comfortable. So you might want to think of a tire like that if you're already riding a full suspension bike. Right, if you have a cross-country bike that has front and rear suspension. But if you're on a hardtail, having that tire do some of the suspension work for you on top of what you've already got built into your bike is nice, especially when you get over a 6-hour race.
So 60 is a little less supple, 120 is a little more supple, 120 may be a better idea for a hardtail rider is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and then you can get that 120 with some sort of puncture protection depending on how your style of riding, and you get just sidewall or just the top layer under the tread. If you're not super aggressive in turns and that sort of thing, you probably don't need the sidewall protection as much. And then you're on a lighter tire and you've got a little more supple sidewall, which will help for those, those last couple hours where you're trying to keep it all together and still create power and make sure that all your muscles stay comfortable.
So the course, the conditions of the course. Assuming most of our listeners are probably on either a hardtail or on a modern full suspension bike, would you set up 60 on the front, 120 in the back, or what?
I personally try to keep the tires similar, and that's just me, so that it's consistent, right? Like I know that if I hit this bump with the front tire, I'm going to get the same kind of response from the back tire. I think mixing and matching tires is really good for someone who's a little more experienced and wants to experiment. But I always like to tell people, like, the day before or the week before is not a good time to start experimenting on which tires and nutrition and all the other things. I mean, that's my job as a journalist and an editor. That's our job, to see like how things respond the day before or whatever. And you let us do all that terrible stuff. But as an end consumer that wants to get to the finish line, consistency is by far the easiest and best way to get there successfully.
Yeah, I have made my final tire decision, in by June, right? I am not only just riding a type of tire, but generally the tires I'm going to be racing during the month before the race. I very, very antsy about reseating tires even close to race day. It scares me.
Yeah, I would say that unless you have some sort of puncture, that you want those tires to be on there for like 2 to 3 weeks. And I think one of the years, 2014 or 15, it was like a Wednesday. I was pre-riding Powerline. I was going down it and had a complete wheel failure. Like, wheel snapped in half, and I had to overnight a new set of wheels and put new tires on, and the whole, find a tire, the whole deal. And it's just, yes, it happens, but
scary.
Yeah. Controlling as much as you can is key, and really being comfortable on it. It might not be the most ideal tire for that condition, because to be honest, most of us don't ride Leadville often, right? We go there maybe a week or two out of the entire year. But if you understand how that tire is going to respond and that specific compound kind of grips on different surfaces, you're in a better position than if you switch tires to this tire that everyone says is the best tire and you have to use it, but then you're jumping on it and you have no idea how it works on the hard pack, or how it works through the rocks, or how it works, in a rain rut, or when you're going, 35, 40 miles an hour down Columbine and you're trying to sneak between a rider going up and another slower rider going down. Understanding how that tire really is gripping and whether you're going to get traction is key.
Yeah, and don't look at Keegan Swenson's tires and go, oh, that must be for me too, because the Maxxis ST stands for short track, folks, and only he can really race that thing on Leadville. Otherwise, you're going to be skidding down Columbine, I guarantee you.
Now, since we're talking tires, let's take a second and talk about wheels. I feel like the tire question is more complicated. Wheels are very straightforward. You want carbon and you want a company with good reputation.
And with those parameters, it is pretty easy to arrive at Envy. Carbon is their game, and a great reputation is in their name. From there, all you have to do is pick out the right wheel set.
And again, the decision is very easy. You go straight for the M5. Unless you ride extremely hard, like you plan on hitting jumps on the Leadville course and treating the Sugarloaf descent like it is a enduro course, then the M5 is the wheel set for you.
Yeah, the M5 is Envy's climbing XC wheel. This thing is made with Leadville in mind. Light, stable at speed, yet offers some compliance for the Goat Trail descent and Leadville's other super chunk sections.
Yeah, it has a modern internal rim width, so your tires aren't bulging too much. It has hookless beads. If you do have a hard rock strike, your tires should not suffer from a pinch flat. These are the qualities you are looking for in a Leadville race wheel.
Yeah, you can mess around with tires all you want, but we hope whatever you decide, you will mount those tires on a set of Envy M5 wheels. To check out the best carbon wheels and components, go to Envy. That's ENVE.com. Okay, more now with our senior tech editor, Troy Templin, as we learn how to read a sidewall and understand knob patterns. Troy, help us out with something, and that is, all this junk we see on the sidewall, all this print material we got to read through on the sidewall. I think they call it a hot patch or something like that. Is the real term for it. What should we be looking? What should we be focusing on? All those numbers and symbols. Where should our eyes go, and what do we need to know about what's printed on the sidewall?
It is getting very confusing because a lot of the stuff on your hot patch is now marketing. And so a lot of it is kind of those technologies that I was talking about, especially when you look at like the side of a Maxxis tire. You can have two of the exact same tire, but they've got, 6 different logos on them. And that comes down to compound. It comes down to the casing, and obviously the tread pattern is going to be within the name. But even you'll have tires that have the same name, but one might be like race and one might be regular, and they'll have completely different tread patterns. So really, when you're looking at that, sometimes that's a way to help navigate to replacing a tire. But at the end of the day, it's looking at the kind of the core of the tire and the technology that's in it. Because I have 2 of the exact same tires, for example, out in the garage, and they have completely different hot patches. Like all the symbols and all the numbers and everything are all different, but they're the same tire. They're just different years because they've kind of evolved in the way that they market all of these things. But the hot patch is a good spot to really help kind of start the process of choosing tire pressure and those sorts of things. But at the same time, I like to remind people that the pressure ratings that are on tires, that is like a safety standard, not a like actual riding standard. And that's where when the tire says you have to run 40 PSI, I would say that I haven't ridden 40 PSI on a mountain bike tire in, I don't know how many years. So 15, 20 years.
Yeah, the PSI number gets kind of silly. But I would gather sizing, if we're looking at the sizing, that should be an accurate number. Obviously, you taught us here about TPI, and that number should be somewhere on the sidewall, and that's something we can rely on, at least with a hot patch. There's an ETRTO number sometimes, but I think for the most part, especially with mountain bike tires, we can probably ignore that. That's for legal reasons more than anything. TL and TR that shows up once in a while, I guess, the 2 symbols, tubeless and tubeless ready. Any differences there?
Well, sometimes it'll be in the bead. The type of bead that they use will kind of determine the way that they symbolize that. Meaning like a tubeless ready tire will still work fairly well on a wheel that isn't made to be tubeless, but like a tubeless specific wheel a lot of times doesn't work well on a wheel that is meant to have a tube. And that kind of brings up like a great point, is that we, in the mountain bike industry, tubeless has been around for, I don't know, since the 90s. Yeah. And 25 years, I guess. Wow. It's evolved so much in the last 6 years, not even over that whole lifespan, but just in the last, 5 to 6, 7 years. So I think that we're kind of out of that phase. So unless you're riding a bike that is, 10 years old and has wheels that are 10 years old, you probably don't need to pay attention to that as much. But yeah, some of those labelings are going to be if your wheel is hooked versus hookless. In the mountain bikes, because tire pressures are so low, we're not even close to like the functional threshold of any of these tires. So that's good. But the one thing that has changed and kind of modifies some of that is the rim width. So your rim width can modify the labeling on that tire. So if your bike, especially if your bike's like 5 years old or maybe a little older, and it says, your frame can only fit a 2.3, and you buy a 2.3, but you've got these really wide rims, they still might not fit. They might hit on the side, or they'll hit if we get some rain or, you get some sand or something in there. So that's where, like we had mentioned earlier, is that having that tire set up and riding it in conditions of all sorts well before you get to 10,000 feet is ideal.
And we see a lot of messaging from the tire companies about rubber compounds, what rubber compounds they might be using up top, in the main contact area. Why do we care about this?
There are rubber compounds that are like race day specific rubber compounds. And if you put that tire on a month out, you might not have any tire left by the time it's race day. But they usually make that exact same tire with kind of a more traditional, regular traction type of rubber. There's probably, that's one of the largest pieces to all of this is compounds, and most compounds are mixes. So you'll have the outermost will be a little bit stickier, and then as you go through the tire, it'll get a little bit harder, so you don't actually run down into the casing. But those race day type tires are exactly that. They are not for I would say the average person, unless you're okay with changing tires only a few days out, because I have ridden race day tires that didn't make it through race day. Like depending on your ride style and that sort of thing, you can burn through those lugs. And as soon as those lugs start to get, knocked off, the tire profile and the way that it sits and the way that it rides changes significantly. So those are things to pay attention to.
So does durometer tell us something about compounds, or is that just a way of measuring? What is that about, durometer? I hear that.
The durometer will help you understand compound, but it's not everything. It's only a small piece of that. And that's why it's not talked about as much. Originally, when they were really mixing tires and rubbers, the durometer was kind of like the quick and easy way to kind of sell it to people. But now it's gone away because there's so many mixes and changes, and we have rubbers now that are far more advanced that don't rely completely on that to tell you the lifespan of a tire.
One thing that everyone can see when they look at their tires, they are knobs. I look at knobs and I wonder if this is just a marketing person trying to talk to me to get me to buy a tire, if there's really some purpose here. I can never really tell. I mean, you listen to a guy like Jan Heine up at bicycling, or up at in the Northwest there. He sells Renaer's tires, and he doesn't, he puts out this square knob pattern tire that's pretty boring to look at, but he claims it's very effective. So what's in the knob pattern? Like, is there any voodoo magic going on here, or is it just eye candy?
No, knobs are definitely important, and that combined with the compound is probably the two things that change a tire most significantly. There's a kind of a weird misunderstanding about knobs and tread, is that the more rubber you have on the ground, the more traction you have. It's like, think of like Formula One racing. Like, they don't put rain tires on until there is standing water. right? They want as much rubber on the ground as possible. The thing with mountain biking is that we rarely are on surfaces that are completely smooth. It might feel smooth, but the surface itself is not, right? You have little micro rocks, or you have a little bit of dust that's not seeded into that ground. And so the knobs help kind of cut through that and kind of support you over top of some of those different terrains. And that's why you see like those micro knobs are good if it's really hard packed and you're able to get most of your tire on the ground all the time. But if it's really loose, that's where you want that thicker, bigger knob to really kind of dig through that silt or that soft dirt and bite into the dirt and get down to like a firmer layer. And if you can't, it gives it kind of a little bit of resistance as you're turning or you're stopping or you're accelerating. And so that's why you really want the knob. And for something like Leadville, it's fairly easy, right? As far as the terrain, and getting a tire, like a really fast tire with a smaller knob, is probably good. And then for some of these descents, having a little bit larger lug on the side is good, but you don't want to go like full, like you said, like the full slick, essentially. It's going to be an eventful day with some of these descents if you try to do that, especially with the rain ruts that, have been coming back. Yeah. So.
You mean the Keegan tire is going to be an eventful day, in other words. The Aspen ST will rock your world.
Yeah, if you choose that tire, you might want a medic crew and or a support crew at the bottom of each of the descents to scoop up whichever part didn't make it the furthest.
Let's get a little prescriptive if we can. I know you're a journalist, and so you don't take sides, but what are some recommendations that you would make for the Leadville racer?
I don't have a specific tire brand that I commit to. I think that each tire brand makes a very comparable tires. I don't think there's one brand that really stands out. I mean, I know Maxxis is on the side of essentially every stock mountain bike, it seems, these days. And that, I think, comes down to just sheer volume and budget and capability. I mean, they're one of the few tire brands that actually owns their own factory. They're part of the CST group, and people go to them to have tires made. So they have the bank account to do a ton of testing, a ton of compound research, and they have the capability of being very fast and flexible. I mean, they can prioritize themselves over their customers, which could be another tire brand. And I think we see a lot of Maxxis tires on bikes because, a bicycle company can say, hey, we want this type of tire, but we need it at this price. And Maxxis can simply say, yeah, we can do that, because they can just change a couple little things. They can change the combination. And that's why you get a lot of OE tires that then when you want to go replace them, you can't find the exact replacement because that tire was made for a specific, whatever it is, budget and tread and durability and all of these little things. So they're very flexible in that capability. But then you look at a smaller company, maybe WTB, where they're really hyper focused on just cycling. They don't do motorcycles and scooters and UTVs and ATVs and all these other things. And so they put a lot of emphasis in understanding mountain biking specifically. And that gives them a little advantage. They might not be as quick to respond, and their testing might be different, but they have a lot of people that really understand what it takes to do each kind of separate discipline. And I think that gives them a little bit of advantage. And then you have, there's so many tire companies out there, I feel like, these days, and some of them come only from motorsports, and they're just like, oh, we can take our motorsports compound that works well for this kind of stuff and put it into a bicycle tire. And they work, they're good, but they're not always the best. And so first of all, I always think dealer. Like, okay, where do I get my tires? What's the easiest way to replace it? Because I don't know. I go through a lot of tires. It seems like, I mean, I've got, a couple of mountain bike rims in the garage right now that I've got flat tires because I just ripped them, and I'm, out shopping for the exact same tire so I can finish that test or really nail down an opinion on that tire. And so being able to have a place that that you can go to that supports that tire and that brand that you choose is key to me. And, someone that you can kind of bounce questions off of when you are trying to explore and try different things. So I wouldn't say there's a specific tire, but I would say that every brand has got a tire that will probably do fairly well at Leadville. It's just making sure that you can have a spare or two to bring with you in case you have problems.
Yeah, we ran a poll last year, Troy, for this show, asking people what tires they were going to run. We asked them what brand first and then model. And Maxxis, far and away, was the winner. They had more than 50% of the vote. More than 50%. And most of those people were on Icons.
Yeah, I was going to say Maxxis has got one of the largest selections of tires. And then within each tire, they have probably the largest selection of variations. And I think that people like that, right? They want to try different things. They want to try different compounds. They find a tire they like, an Icon, right? And then they're like, oh, let's try the softer version. Let's try the, harder compound. Let's try this. And I think that's one of the reasons Maxxis has done so well is that they have that capability. Just they have the budget, they have the background, and they have the capability of just making a ton of tires without having to go through someone else. They are the source for getting it done.
The other contenders were Conti, Specialized. This is in our poll. Conti, Specialized, Vittoria, Schwalbe, and Kenda. But none of them got near the votes that Maxxis got.
And it's really funny that a lot of those are kind of iconic road tire brands. And I think that tells you a lot is that, people find a brand that they trust maybe on their road bike or they trust on their gravel bike. And they, let's say, whoever, Conti makes a mountain bike tire. It might not be the best one, but they've found a home with Continental and they're going to continue down that path because they have that trust built in. But like you said, that market share is significantly smaller. I mean, Specialized has done a really great job with their tires, but historically they've had other people make them and they're kind of the designers. I don't know what it is right now, but there's just a lot of options and there's not a lot of bad options. That's the upside.
Pirelli's in the game now too. I just saw some of their new cross-country tires.
Yeah, Pirelli and Goodyear and a lot of those companies have a lot of compound experience, right? And when you think of Formula One and you think of all of these other things where heat buildup and a lot of other things are happening that we don't have to deal with, their expertise, they start making bike tires and it's pretty easy, in comparison to the other things that they have to deal with.
Of course, this subject, Troy, tire choice is one of the more subjective ones you'll find online, especially with the Leadville Racer. And everyone thinks they have the right answer to this question. What's the best tire at Leadville? The answer probably is the best one is the one that's right for you.
The one that doesn't go flat.
The one that doesn't go flat is another good answer. The one that goes fast, the one that gets you a big buckle, what have you. Is there anywhere that you know of that offers good, reliable, independent testing of tires where we could at least reference some of these choices before us?
I'm a little biased, from where my employer, but I think Pinkbike is a great resource. I mean, obviously Pinkbike is not super XC cross-country based, but those forums, I've used those forums for a long time. And so not specifically the Pinkbike crew, they will chime in on those forums, but really just that's where you get some of your largest audience. And I think that it comes from experience. You know, like people like you or I who have been to Leadville multiple times. I don't always say follow my tire choices, because sometimes mine are dictated by whatever I have to review that month or that day or that sort of thing. So I always sometimes make some silly tire choices just due to like, hey, I need this to be done by next week. And hey, look, I'm going to ride 100 miles. Let's do it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I really enjoyed going to Leadville before I actually raced it. Was there's a lot of stuff going around in town before. You know, I know that, you know, you've done some seminars before the races and kind of that sort of thing. And just getting out there and trying it maybe before you race it is also a good thing. You can learn the course, you can help a friend, you can make new friends and help them. But the community, the Leadville community is just amazing. And that's one of the best parts about the race. That's why I keep going back. Even if I'm not going to race it that year, I'll usually just drive up and hang out and see what's going on and cheer people on and, you know, go to the hike-a-bike section and tell people that they paid for this. And yeah, it's fun.
I think you shouted that at me before.
Yeah, I think I have.
I remember being heckled on the power line. Troy, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much. Appreciate talking with you.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and really just enjoyed the chat. And I hope to see a lot of new and old faces at Leadville. I mean, that's the best part about it.
Once again, thanks to Outside Senior Tech Editor Troy Templin. You'll notice we did not get into inserts because that could be an entire episode in itself. We did touch on inserts last season in episode 14, and that is definitely worth a listen. Troy did leave us with one really great tip regarding sealant, and that is do not mix sealant brands. Troy says that while some of them are similar, you can often hurt the sealant's ability to do its job by mixing brands.
Some of you may remember that there was a tire named after Leadville. Clement had the XC LXV. LXV is the airport code for Leadville. It is, or was, I should say, a 2.1 tire, so a little narrow by today's standards. And as I recall, it was tube only, so never really took off for the Leadville race. Clement sold much of its licensing to Donnelly, which still has the LXV that is in its lineup, but they market it as a bike packing tire. And since we won't be stopping to pitch a tent, I guess we'll stick with the regular old XC tires you heard about in this show. For now, let's wrap this episode. Fatty and I are on social media, most notably Instagram for me, where I'm at Michael Hotton.
And I am pitching my Strava profile. You can find it very easily. Go to leadville.fm/Fatty. Give me a follow.
You'll find both Fatty and me on that Facebook Leadville 100 mountain bike participants page. And if you want to have a conversation, join our Slack channel. You'll find a link to it over at leadville.fm/Slack.
So if you like this show, please go wherever you listen. Give us a 5-star rating. Please write us a review. And you can see all the ways to find the show. Just go to leadville.fm. Good luck in your riding, your racing, your recovery. Thanks so much for listening. And we're going to see you real soon at the starting line.